Hi everyone, welcome to our mini lesson on summarizing. We're going to start with just quickly going over what is a summary. So chances are, if you've been going to school, as long as you have, you've heard teachers use this word. You may have been asked to summarize something before, but what is a summary? Okay, so a summary, if you look it up on Google, is a brief restatement of the main ideas. Now, that might not make a whole lot more sense to you than the word summary, but there's a couple of key words that I want to point out here. The first one is brief. So whenever you are asked to summarize something, whether you're asked to summarize what someone has said, whether you're asked to summarize what you've read, it needs to be brief. Okay, which means it needs to be short. So a summary needs to be a much shorter, smaller version of the original thing, right? So if you're summarizing something that you've read, your summary needs to be much shorter than the actual thing that you read, okay? Brief is a super key word. Your summary should not be the same length as what you read, okay? That kind of ruins the whole point. The next really important word that I want to point out is restatement. Okay, so you are stating again. That's what that means. You're saying it again, right? But you're saying it in your own words. So you're not just copying what they said. Remember, we already know that because we have to do a briefer, we have to do a shorter version, and we're restating it in our own words. So we're saying it again in a different way. Okay, so it's a short restatement, saying it again in your own words, of the main ideas. Okay, now this again is critical. In fact, I'm going to underline it twice. Okay, so your summary, remember, it has to be short, right? So it needs to only focus on the most important ideas of what you've read. It should not have a ton of details in it because it's a summary, a brief restating in your own words of the most important ideas in the story or the text that you've read. So when you're asked to summarize something, that's what we're looking for, a brief stating again in your own words of what the main ideas are, the most important ideas of what you have read. Okay, so that's what a summary is. Now there's many different ways, many different techniques for how to write a summary. And today we're going to focus on how to summarize fiction, right? So how to summarize a story that is not real. So we're not reading nonfiction, we're not summarizing an information piece, but summarizing instead a piece of fiction. And we're going to focus on The City of Ember because that's what we're reading together as a class. So again, there are many different techniques and ways to summarize things. One cool strategy that can be really helpful for summarizing is called somebody wanted but so then. And we use these words to help us focus on those main ideas and to be able to retell them briefly, okay? Which is, of course, the whole point of summarizing. So if I think about chapter 1 of The City of Ember, which we all should have read by now, right? I need to then think about these categories. Who are the characters? What did they want? What got in their way? And so on. Okay, so for my summary, I'm going to pick the main character of our story, or at least the one that we spend the most time on with chapter 1, who is Lena. Okay, so you can see when I ask you for somebody, I want to know who the story is about, or who the character's name is. So I've chosen Lena. Okay. So Lena is our character's name. So the somebody should be fairly straightforward. You pick the character, the main character that the story is revolving around. The next column is a little bit trickier. We need to decide what Lena wanted in this particular chapter. What is she after, right? In all stories, characters have things that they want, things that they're trying to accomplish. And that's a huge part of the story, which is why we need to restate it in our summary. It's part of the main ideas. So if I think about chapter 1, of The City of Ember. Remember, chapter 1 is all about assignment day and the students getting their new jobs because they're leaving school. So what Lena really wanted, right? We could say this in a number of different ways, but what she wanted is, right, to be a messenger. That's the job that she wanted, right? But, and again, with any good story, the characters don't just get what they want right away. There's an obstacle. There's something that gets in their way, something that prevents them from having what they want. So what happens to Lena in chapter 1? Well, she wants to be a messenger, but she picks pipeworks laborer instead, right? So far, see how we're summarizing chapter 1? Are we leaving out a lot of details? Of course we are. Right? There's all kinds of things that we haven't included here that are important from chapter 1, right? But we're getting really right to the heart of the story. We've got our main character, we've got what she wants, and we've got what's gotten in her way. So, how did they respond, right? This is all about the character's reaction. They want something, but they can't get it. So, how do they react? What do they do, right? And what does Lena do? Well, what does she do? She gets upset and worried, right? She is dreading the idea of going underground and being a pipeworks worker. So her response, she doesn't do anything too crazy, right? She doesn't throw things. She doesn't have a tantrum. She doesn't, run away. But she is upset and worried. Okay? And then the last box says then, right? So what happens then? We know who she is. We know what she wanted. We know what got in her way. We know how she reacted. And then finally, how does it resolve? Then, if we think about the end of chapter 1, right? Dune offers to switch jobs, right? So here we have, just like that, all the pieces of chapter 1, the main things, in a really, really brief form. Remember, if we look at our definition of what a summary is, it needs to be a brief restatement of the main ideas, right? We've definitely made it brief, right? We've boiled down an entire chapter into just these 5 boxes, right? We've restated it. I didn't copy any of these words from the book, right? None of these are sentences taken directly from the book. I put them in my own words, and I've really focused on the main ideas, right? Just the core of the story, leaving out the details. So the last step is pretty straightforward. We're just going to put it all together. We're going to put all this together in a nice couple of sentences. So just kind of fill in the missing words to make it all make sense. So we're just going to start with Lena. Lena wanted to be a messenger. Okay? There we go. There I've got my somebody and my wanted. And I'm going to put a period. And then I'm going to do the but. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change that period to a comma, and I'm going to keep this sentence rolling, and I'm going to say, but she chose Pipeworks laborer instead. Now I'm going to put a period. Okay? So I've already got my somebody, wanted, and but all included there in a nice little sentence. So I'm going to move on to my so. She was upset and dreading the job until Dune offered to switch jobs with her. Right? So you see how I've used the information from these 5 boxes, right? And I've put it together in 2 sentences. Lena wanted to be a messenger, but she chose Pipeworks labor instead. She was upset and dreading the job until Dune offered to switch jobs with her. Okay? Now, this is really, really basic, really straightforward. You can see it fits the criteria of a brief restatement of the main ideas. It is a summary, for sure, right? I've taken all of chapter 1, right, and boiled it down to 2 sentences, right? Now, could I add more to this? Absolutely, I could, right? I could add in a little bit more detail, right? So I could add in like kind of when this was happening, right? I could add in on, now I've forgotten what it's called. What is the assignment day? That's what it's called. Thank you, brain, for turning back on. On assignment day, Lena wanted to be a messenger, right? But she chose Pipeworks laborer from the bag instead, right? So I can choose to add in a few more details just to give it a little bit more context, right? So I know when this is happening. I know when I talk about her choosing Pipeworks laborer, I can picture her reaching into the bag and drawing it out. I could add until Dune offered to switch jobs with her. So she ended up as a messenger after all. Right? I can choose to fancy up my summary by adding in a few more details, right? Which is nice because it shows a little bit more, it gives us a little bit more. But I really shouldn't add too much more than that, because remember, the whole point of a summary is to focus on the main ideas, right? For you to be able to tell me the gist of the story and what happened in a really short, simple form. All right. The actual tough part of coming up with a summary is deciding what we want to put in these boxes, right? What is it actually that the character wants, and what is it that gets in their way? In chapter 1, it's fairly straightforward, right? But it's not always the case. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper, or sometimes you have to infer a little bit deeper. And again, remember, I picked Lena for this summary, but we kind of have two main characters, right, in our story. So if I think about, if I brought over the same piece of paper here, but this time, if I wrote a summary for chapter 1, but I focused on Dune, right, because he's another main character, this summary would look quite different if I told it from his point of view, right? What did Dune want? Well, Dune wanted a job that would let him help the city. Right? Whether that was electrician or pipeworks worker, he wanted some sort of job that would be useful and let him help the city. Well, what got in his way? Well, he chose messenger instead, right? And then here's where it gets really different. How did Dune respond? Well, what does he do? He crumples the paper and gives an angry speech. Right? Telling the mayor and everyone that the city is failing, right? Very different than how Lena responds. They both have the same problem in that they chose a job they didn't want, right? But he has a very different response than Lena, right? So then how does it end? He switches jobs with Lena. Right? So if I were to put this together in a summary, right, it still covers a lot of those same ideas, but it's a little bit different because I focused on Dune as the main character instead of Lena, because in chapter 1 they are both there equally represented. In other chapters, like chapter 2 for example, we really could only focus on Lena because she's the only one that's really mentioned, right? So it all depends on what your story is and who it's focusing on. Okay, so if I were to finish this and put it all together, I would again start with my boxes. Dune wanted a job that would let him help save the city, but he chose messenger instead. So he threw his paper away and yelled at the mayor about the city. Then he offered to switch jobs with Lena. So you can see the content of my summary is different because I focused on a different character instead, right? But the process is still the same. I still go through the boxes. I still ask myself, what did the character want? What got in his way? How did he respond? And then how did it end, right? And then actually putting it together into the summary, right? That's also the same, okay? Because I'm just going through my boxes and then I'm just putting them in full sentences instead. Okay, so that's sort of the process for how you go through a summary. Remember, you can choose to jazz it up. You can see all the pink stuff here I've added is extra information if you want to. But the main point of a summary, remember, is to create a brief restatement of the main idea, right? So remember, a short retelling in your own words, the main ideas, the most important facts of the story. Okay, so that's our brief mini lesson on summarizing. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.